Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we're going to paint some sunflowers and we're going to compose them on a greetings card. So if any of you ever wondered whether watercolour paper was good for greetings cards, then this is the tutorial for you. So grab your paints and let's get started. The sun is finally out in the UK, so it's time to paint some sunflowers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a cluster. I like to think of it maybe as a family of sunflowers, and there's a piece of this watercolour piece of paper is actually sort of underneath here. It's that wide because we're going to turn this into a greetings card. So I'm going to use my ruler just to get a nice straight tall line for my sunflowers. I'm going to have one tall one in the middle, and then maybe two little ones like that. So I'm now going to just draw in some simple pot shapes, and I'm also going to draw in the circle of the face of the sunflower. I've used a sort of base line along the bottom, so I know where all my pots are going to sort of all sit along, but some we can put just above that baseline, and some I'm going to have this one sort of nice. I think I'll have that one even further back actually, a nice sort of tall one. So I've just done two lines above, and then we can do a line that just curves across the top. There we go. Right, so it is time to start painting, but you can notice here I've got three circles that are sort of fairly simple straight on circles, and then two where the sunflowers are angled, and so it's very important that you also angle your central circle. So we just draw a sort of squashed circle which ends up becoming an oval. Okay, it's time to paint. So the first thing we're going to do is the actual flower heads themselves. So we need some petals, and cadmium yellow is a fantastic sunflower petal colour. There are all sorts of different types of sunflower, and I'm just going to go for a very sort of classic, sort of almost sort of cartoonish, illustratory style of sunflower. I'm not going to get too technical, and I'm going to begin by painting a series of spaced out tapered lines that just overlap into the center of the circle, and I'm using a 2/10 brush, which for this size of painting seems to work very nicely. It's just really important that your petals all imagine they're all growing from that central point, and that you space them out so they're not touching each other, but they're just overlapping into the center of that circle. So for now, I'm going to fill those in, and then we can have a look at how we do them on the side-facing sunflowers. Painting sunflowers on an angle, I mean the petals across the back are fairly straightforward to do. It's more about the ones across the front of the flower, and with watercolour it's all about allowing your light colours the sort of space to be able to show up, so you don't paint dark things first and then put light colours over the top. So what we'll have to do when we come to painting the centres of these flowers is we'll just have to be careful with how we paint sort of in and around our lighter colours. So you can see I'm just making these petals at the front just a little bit shorter, a little bit more squashed, but still that one is still facing pretty much openly. It's this one really that's more of the challenge. So what I'm going to do is start to put really sort of squat petals that are sort of curving upwards. And we will be doing a second layer of petals, so this is just our first one. But you can see how they're all just facing upwards. The reason we do the petals first is so we know how much space they take up, because they are the main event of the sunflower. And now I'm going to start painting in the stems. The size 2/10 brush is still really good for this. So I've mixed up some green gold and sap green to make a nice yellowy green colour for our stem. Now the way I like to do it is by curving the stem out into a leaf each time. So I curl out and then I join the stem at the bottom, and then from that point we can do it. You can either sort of curl out first and join the stem, or if you prefer, I'm always aware as a left-hander I might be into doing things a bit more backwards to everybody else, so it's up to you really whether you prefer doing the curl or the stem first. But having that pencil line is so useful. Also, doing it like this means that we end up with a much more natural looking stem rather than just a straight line with some leaves coming off it. Watercolour and painting flowers in particular is so much about attention to detail, even when painting seemingly simple shapes. I'm now adding a bit more sap green to that mix and painting in my leaves. So the heart-shaped leaf of a sunflower is achieved with 2 mirrored strokes, where you start with the fat sort of belly of the brush and then you can squash it into a fine point. A little bit of hair on my brush there. And just fill in the second one. Sometimes it's a bit harder. Say, for example, we've got our sunflowers all quite close together. That's not a problem though. You can sort of leave the ones you're not sure about just yet and fill in those that do have the space. And I love that little raw edge we get as if you angle the brush down low like that on an angle. That lower half of the leaf gets a really nice sort of raw edge. And I've positioned my leaves so that they spaced quite nicely sort of around the flower heads themselves and help with the general composition. So a leaf like this one, I'm going to use a smaller brush and I'm just going to sort of work it in, either to make it just a bit smaller so it doesn't touch the other flower, or you could make it a bit sort of narrower so it's just a single stroke like that. But yeah, having a smaller brush just gives you a little bit more control if you want to position it better. I've now got an even smaller brush, a 3/10, and I've mixed in a bit of cadmium orange to my cadmium yellow, and I'm doing the next layer of petals. So I'm painting them in between. There'll be a little bit of sort of overlap onto the previous petals, and that's why it's important to have that bit of orange in the yellow so these new petals stand out. I find it easier using a slightly smaller brush just to ensure these petals stay individual and don't all merge into one another, because otherwise then we'll be left with a big blob. Lovely. And then of course the petals on the upturned flowers. There's a bit more sort of room for maybe a few more sort of twisted angles curled petals. And the other nice thing is you can use this second layer to sort of even up the shape if you felt that you had a few slightly wayward or unevenly distributed petals in the first round. Nice one. Let's do the pots. I've got some warm colours here. I've got some cadmium orange, some yellow ochre, cadmium red and burnt sienna, and then just a little bit of a mix of them. So the first thing I need to decide is whether I'm going to add anything to my pots, like a rim like that. So just draw it in, or maybe a little sort of little saucer. If you haven't yet had a go at my geranium painting tutorial, you will also find a nice sort of little bit of a terracotta pot tutorial going on. And sometimes you get like a nice little detail on the front of a pot. Little ring like that, which could be kind of fun. Okay. I like to do them in a fairly sort of loose wash style. So I start with the mix of yellow ochre and cadmium orange, and then I like to drop in bits of other warm colour into that mix. Don't forget about the burnt sienna, it's a really good colour. So I sort of go around the edges first, and then clean off my brush and also blot it off there because there's lots of water going on, and then just kind of draw the colour in. And then if I want, I'll just pop in a little bit more. Nice. And then if you wanted, you could add at this stage just a little bit of darkness in with a bit of shadow mixed with burnt sienna and French ultramarine blue. And we'll be doing shadow in general at the end, but this is a nice additional sort of wet blend to bloom into those pots. I paint in the large sections first, and then whilst they're allowed to dry, I can sort of move on to bits that are right next to the dried sections. And this also goes for the rims of the pots as well, to make sure they stay separate from the body of the pot. It's good to paint one section, allow it to dry, and then paint the next one, because it's a real sort of wet blend, these terracotta pots. I think a little bit of unpainted space works as well. Even though they're not officially sort of shiny things, they've got so much texture going on that it just kind of works. And then you'll see here that I'm just starting to paint around the back edge, so I'm just repeating that curve. So for this one here, I'm going to paint around the edge of the little detail. And with a wet brush, just to blend that out. First thing is to get a little bit of darkness in underneath it, whilst the pot is still being painted, so it's still wet and blending. And then of course the inside of that ring. Get that painted up as well, and then we'll let that just dry a little whilst we wait for it. So we'll just paint in the back edges of the rims. And there we go. We'll add a little bit more shadow to that when we finish the piece. So it's all about painting those in sections, allowing them to dry before you paint something that's right up next to them, and then allowing the lovely wet blends to give a nice bit of texture. And yeah, they look really nice. So we're on to the next stage, which is going to be the center of the flowers. For the center of the sunflower, we begin with a wet, sort of dappled wash of yellow ochre, and then we're going to build up the darker colours. So that pencil circle that we drew in the first place is just really handy now, and we're painting right up to the edge. A few little bits of unpainted space, that's all good. Then with burnt sienna, I'm going to just dab the colour around the edge, lots of little dots. Some will catch the wetness of the inner circle, some will be crisp and make a lovely textured outline. I'm using it quite concentrated because I want to get that dark, intense colour. And I can just go round again, maybe drawing the colour in a tiny bit, always dabbing the brush, dotting the brush. Then I clean the brush off, and I'm going to get a bit of Mars Black, quite dilute. And that bit of wetness in the centre is still there, which is great. So I can just dab that Mars Black in the centre and let it run. And then I'm going to get a little bit more Mars Black just on the tip of my brush. Add a few extra dots around the edge, and then with a clean brush, just want to blend things, just dabbed a little bit, getting that centre a bit more dispersed and the outer edge a bit more drawn in, so we get these lovely textured sunflowers. Now, how do we do the angled flower? Well, same starting point, yellow ochre, and then we go for the near side edge with the burnt sienna. And it's just going to taper off, so it's quite broad on the near edge, and then we're going to do much thinner dots on that side, and that already helps create a dome-like effect with this centre. And then the Mars Black is going to be showing more of a sort of well in the centre, so we just want it a little curve of it like that. Then I get a bit more Mars black on my brush, down round the front. Just around the front, and then clean the brush off, blot it off, and then we can just dab that a little bit, but keeping that sort of U shape fairly intact, and we're just softening it. That looks good. To paint the one that's a little bit obscured by petals, I've put in the yellow ochre just where I can see it, and then it's a case of just being a bit careful with the brush. You can sort of outline the petals first if you want, and then just carefully dab in around them. Because not painting the petals with the yellow ochre wash means they will stay crisp and dry. So you can allow your brown to just creep in and amongst them, in the gaps. And then it's going to be even harder to sort of get that central black well, but not impossible. And then I can just do a few little dabs. Now into the home straight with detail. The stems can do a little bit of sap green to just help them finish off. So the first thing is, especially for this one too, creating a nice sort of cup shape underneath the sunflower head, and then each stem adding a little bit of that green and a few leaf lines, all with your thinnest brush. And then the sap green can also act as a bit of a shadow, any leaf that overlaps over the top like this, just blending it down a little bit. And then when you come to the base, this is a really helpful way of just sort of evening out your stem and getting it sitting in the pot nicely. For the soil in the pot, if you can see any, I like to use a shadowy mix because the soil is so much sort of darker than just a pure burnt sienna colour. And just again with the smallest brush, little dabs. Little bits might be catching the light. Again, it's one of those things that we're using unpainted space to create texture really, rather than it being a sort of actually shiny thing that's catching the light. The final stage is the shadow. I've got my blue and brown mix here, but I've also got one with a little bit of sap green in it, because what I'm going to do is just add a little bit, it's probably even too much there, yeah, there we go, just to the bottom half of these sunflowers, and then just a little bit there, not too much. You don't want to suddenly darken down this sunny piece. But even when painting sort of fun illustrations like this, I'm always keen to find ways to really make them pop off the page, and a little bit of shadow is a great way of doing that. And then down at the pots themselves, I'm going to use the blue and brown shadow mix. So I'm going to add a little bit first to the little detailed ring, and a little bit to the saucer. And then I can just get my larger brush in a second. I'll just get a little bit on those ones as well, especially that one where the leaf is coming over. So yeah, there will be points where you need some actual shadow, say here as well, got a leaf coming down over. Here where the pot in front is just concealing it a little bit. And then some shadow for, whoops, the actual ground, just to ground it a little bit, so we can choose a sort of direction for the shadow to sit. And just a little swipe of the brush, and there we go. Now we'll let it dry and we'll turn it into a card. So our card has been cut out in advance, and what I did was I measured on the back where the central point was. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a ruler, and I'm going to use the sort of blunt side of my scalpel. So that's the cutting side, but I'm going to just use the back and use that to score down that line, and that will help me make a really nice clean fold. Just pressing it down gently. You just want to coax these things. And there we go, we've got a lovely greetings card. Watercolour paper is really fantastic for greetings cards because it is 300 grams, the kind of card paper I use. I think if you're using a thinner watercolour paper, it probably wouldn't do quite so well, but it can stand up, there we go, really, really nicely, and you've got plenty of room to write something in the middle. So there we go. And I think this could be a really cool card, maybe for a family welcoming a new baby. You could have all the members of the family and one extra plant just there, or just a really nice summary card for anyone who's into their gardening. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables me to keep creating these videos that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed this one, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you're getting on. And of course, if you subscribe, then you'll never miss another video. Until next time, bye!